Ever notice how some holidays just kind of sneak up on you?
Yeah.
Like, we're all ready with the greeting cards and the social media posts.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual history of the thing,
Yeah.
crickets.
Totally.
And that is exactly what today's deep dive is all about.
Mm.
National Daughters Day. Is it just a Hallmark holiday or something more?
You know, you've actually hit on a really interesting point there.
Have I?
Yeah. We dug into two totally different podcast scripts about Daughter's Day, and neither one could really pin down like a clear origin story.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
It's so true, though. Like Mother's Day, we've got Anna Jarvis, the whole campaign. It's very clear cut.
Right.
But Daughter's Day, it's like, poof, it just appeared.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, right?
Okay.
Because without that one person or that specific event, it really suggests that this holiday emerged more organically from, our culture at large.
Okay, so that's our mystery then.
Yeah.
But how do these scripts actually tackle the whole Daughter's Day thing?
Well,
Where do they even begin?
so the first script we looked at, it dives right into the HRW to celebrate part.
Really?
Yeah, it's all about, those special gestures, like Monty Paytas, maybe writing a heartfelt letter, or even just settling in for, like, a movie night together.
So sweet.
It's the thought that counts kind of thing.
Aw.
And to really drive that sentimental point home, they even include a couple of anecdotes.
Okay.
There's one about this mom in Florida who takes her daughter for ice cream every single year. And then there's another one about a dad in California who writes his daughter a letter every year.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So it's all very heartwarming, very feel-good.
Yeah, definitely tugs at the heartstrings a bit. But it's interesting.
Yeah, what's that?
Even though it's all very lighthearted, this whole focus on celebration,
Yeah.
it kind of hints at something we see with a lot of family-centric holidays these days.
Totally. It's like this need to express that love and appreciation no matter how big or small the gesture.
Right. It's not just about daughters as an abstract concept. It's about celebrating your daughter.
Exactly. And that actually points to a really fascinating shift in family dynamics, don't you think?
In what way?
Well, we're moving away from those rigid traditional roles and embracing this more personalized approach to family.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think that's really reflected in how we celebrate these holidays now.
Now, the second script we dug into takes a slightly different approach. They're a little more historical, a little more analytical.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And their theory about Daughter's Day is pretty interesting. They see it as part of this larger trend, this wave of family-focused holidays that popped up, particularly in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Interesting. So like a symptom of our times almost.
Exactly, like a reflection of how our values and priorities have shifted over time.
And what do they attribute that to? I mean, why the sudden surge in these family-centric holidays?
That's a great question. And what the script suggests is that it's not just about celebrating these broad roles like mother or daughter, but also about acknowledging the individual within the family unit. So are these holidays a symptom of a changing world? Is that what they're saying?
It's definitely one way to interpret it, right? Like as those traditional family structures started evolving in the late 20th century, we started seeing more emphasis on celebrating the individual family members.
It's like we needed a way to acknowledge those changes, but in a very public way.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, was this always happening? Like, were people celebrating daughters in their own ways before?
Right, but maybe they just didn't have the, platform to make it a widespread thing.
Now, that's an interesting thought, and it leads us perfectly into another point both scripts touched on, the role of social media in really amplifying Daughter's Day.
Right. It's almost like social media gave Daughter's Day the missing ingredient, It provided that platform it needed to really explode.
And it's interesting, right? Because before we had these digital platforms, how did we even share these kinds of sentiments?
I know, it makes you think.
Yeah.
But before we go down that rabbit hole, anything about those different takes on Daughter's Day really stand out to you?
Honestly, it's fascinating how even though those scripts took such different approaches, both of them mention that Daughter's Day isn't unique to the U.S.
Oh, that's right.
Apparently, lots of other countries have their own versions of Daughter's Day, which I think is pretty telling.
Yeah, one of the scripts specifically mentioned India and the UK and even Australia.
Right.
And I bet there are tons more out there we didn't even scratch the surface on. But what do you think that says about this whole thing?
To me, it really highlights that this desire to celebrate daughters, that parent-daughter bond, it's a universal thing.
It's not limited by culture or anything.
Exactly. It might look different from country to country, the way it's celebrated, but that core idea, that seems to resonate everywhere.
It makes you think. It's like maybe without those big historical figures or origin stories, it's easier for us to find our own meaning in these holidays.
Absolutely. It's less about sticking to some predetermined script and more about what resonates with you personally.
Right, exactly. But speaking of scripts, didn't both of the ones we looked at mention how social media kind of throws a wrench in the works?
It's inescapable at this point, isn't it? Social media might have its downsides, but it's undeniable how it's changed the way we experience, well, pretty much everything.
No kidding. And when it comes to holidays, it's like Daughter's Day suddenly has this massive platform, this megaphone to reach everyone.
It's true, but then you're also left wondering, is it really amplifying those genuine connections, or is it all just like performative posting for the gram?
Oh, totally. Like how many times have you scrolled through those holiday posts and thought, okay, is this heartfelt or are they just trying to prove they're celebrating the right way?
100%.
Yeah.
That's the double-edged sword of social media, isn't it? It can be a beautiful way to share meaningful moments, but there's always that potential for it to become superficial.
Yeah, that's a real bummer. So like, what can we even do about it?
Honestly, I think just recognizing that duality, that potential for both the genuine and the superficial, that's a good first step.
Okay, so just being aware of it.
Right, because when we're aware of those influences, we can make more conscious choices about how we're engaging.
So it's like being a mindful consumer, but for holidays. That's interesting.
Exactly. We always have a choice. We don't have to buy into the commercialized version of things. We can choose to celebrate in ways that feel real and authentic to us. So to loop back to Daughter's Day, it's not about rejecting all the cards in the social media posts. It's about asking yourself, does this feel meaningful to me, or am I just doing it for the show?
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
I get it. So much to think about. Let's see if we can sum this all up. We started with this mystery, this holiday, with no real origin story. Then we dove into two totally different takes on celebrating it and how social media comes into play. Oh, and how it's not just an American thing, it's global.
It's a lot, right? It's like a perfect example of how holidays can evolve and take on new meaning in the digital age.
For sure. But, it all comes back to this idea that no one really owns Daughter's Day. Its meaning is constantly shifting, evolving, based on how people choose to celebrate it. And that kind of makes you wonder, does that make it more meaningful?
What do you mean?
Well, it's adaptable, right? It's open to interpretation. Or does that actually make it more vulnerable, like easier for companies to come in and commercialize it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can something like Daughter's Day hold on to that heartfelt core when you've got all these commercial interests vying for attention? What do you think?
Part of me really wants to be optimistic. I want to believe that celebrating people we love, that can't be totally co-opted by marketing, right? But then again, when you think about how much of our lives are already shaped by advertising, it really makes you wonder. I mean, it's not like Hallmark invented Daughter's Day to sell more cards, right?
Right.
So maybe that actually gives it some protection. Maybe that open-endedness, that lack of a commercial origin story, makes it harder to turn into just another sales season.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
It makes you wonder, though, if that blank canvas, the one that makes it so adaptable, also makes it more susceptible to being painted over by those commercial interests.
Almost like a paradox, isn't it?
Totally. On the one hand, we've got this day that seems to have bubbled up from this genuine desire to celebrate daughters.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, it's pretty easy for companies to swoop in with a celebrate by buying this message.
Right.
How do we fight that?
Right. I think it comes down to being aware of those influences and making conscious choices about how we participate.
Okay, so you're saying we shouldn't just reject everything commercial, but...
Right. It's about asking ourselves, is this purchase, this activity, truly aligned with how I want to celebrate?
So it's like being mindful consumers, but in the context of holidays.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have agency, that we don't have to passively accept the commercialized version of things. We can choose to celebrate Daughter's Day in ways that feel authentic and meaningful to us, regardless of what the marketing campaigns tell us to do.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. We started with this mystery. Where did Daughter's Day even come from? Then we looked at how those two scripts explored different facets of celebrating it, how social media added its own twist, and how this isn't just a U.S. thing, it's global.
It's a lot, right? It's like a perfect example of how holidays can evolve and take on new meaning in the digital age.
For sure. But, it all comes back to this idea that no one really owns Daughter's Day.
That's true.
Its meaning is constantly shifting, evolving, based on how people choose to celebrate it.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes you wonder, does that make it more meaningful?
What do you mean?
Well, it's adaptable, right? It's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Or does that actually make it more vulnerable? Like easier for companies to come in and commercialize it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can something like Daughter's Day hold on to that heartfelt core when you've got all these commercial interests vying for attention?
That's tough.
What do you think?
You know, part of me really wants to be optimistic. I want to believe that celebrating people we love, that can't be totally co-opted by marketing, right?
Right.
But then again, when you think about how much of our lives are already shaped by advertising, it really makes you wonder.
You're right. It's a big one.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the mysterious and surprisingly complex world of National Daughters Day, here's a final thought for you to ponder. In a world saturated with commercialism, can we hold on to the heartfelt origins of holidays like this? Or will they inevitably become just another date on the marketing calendar? The answer, like the meaning of Daughter's Day itself, is up to us.